Hi, my name is Connor Peterson, and today I'll be presenting on Genoa and her history as told through her walls. A quick background before I get into the history of Genoa. It's located on Italy's Mediterranean Sea on the northwestern coast, and it's believed to have been inhabited as early as 5th century BC by several ancient civilizations such as the Greeks and the Etruscans. And this would make sense as the name Genoa is believed to have been derived from the Greek god Janus, who was the god with two faces. And seeing as Genoa faces both the sea and the mountains, it would be a proper name for this young city. Also, something I want to touch on before I get into the history of Genoa is an important underlying theme throughout this time period, and this is the battle between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Throughout Italy, during the medieval and the Renaissance era, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines were the two major political factions who were battling for control all over Italy, or what is known as Italy today. And specifically during the 13th through the 15th centuries, Genoa was particularly influenced by this battle between the two factions. In Genoa, the Guelphs were known as the Rampini, and the Ghibellines were known as the Mascarati. And there were four major families throughout Genoa's history within these two groups. The Fieschi and the Grimaldi were associated with the Rampini, and they struggled against the Doria and Spinoli, which were Mascarati. And what's important about these families is that as I go throughout the presentation, there will be several leaders who influence the sort of expansions or buildings of certain parts of the walls. And these physical structures acted as physical examples of their political successes over one another. And so they really make an effort to solidify their successes in these physical structures throughout the various parts of the city. The first set of walls was built in 9th century BC, 9th century AD under Berenger II of Italy, and he included three gates in these walls. One of these is Porto Serravalle, which is circled there in the yellow, and the other two were unnamed at the time. And the total area encompassed by the set of walls was 22 hectares. Then Genoa undergoes into the consular period from 1080 to 1190, and this was Genoa being under control of several consuls or groups of wealthy families that were lawyers and bankers and judges who all worked amongst each other to act as Genoa's really main political head. And it's during this period that Genoa begins to grow rapidly, and that's also partly due to its participation in the First Crusade. That was led by Guglielmo and Briaco, whose bust is over there on the left. The Genoese were notoriously ferocious warriors and also had maybe the most skilled navy, but definitely the largest navy at the time. And so they were very successful throughout the Crusades in places such as Jerusalem and Palestine. And when they won, they were also notorious for looting and pillaging the places that they won and coming back with many treasures. And it's these treasures that would act as the foundation that Genoa would really begin to build its wealth on in the many years to come. And so its participation in the Crusades could be seen as the significant piece as to why Genoa was able to expand in the way that it did. The first expansion of walls came in 1155 during the consular period, and these were known to be called the Barbarossa walls. And this was due to pressure from Frederick Barbarossa as he moved throughout northern Italy and was conquering different city-states. Genoa took a particularly specific endeavors to defend the city from this. And so the walls were expanded in all directions, specifically the north and northeast. And there were three main gates added as well: Porto Soprana, Porto de Vaca, and Porto Area. Today, two of these walls and gates stand today. Left is Porto Soprana, and on the right is Porto de Vaca. And Porto de Vaca specifically has managed to exist over since the original expansion, because in the 17th century it was incorporated into a palace. And I think this really speaks to the beauty in studying history, is that as these newer foundations are built upon pre-existing one, you can begin to strip them away layer by layer, and you're able to read a story into the building. Specifically with these two, you can see that these bastions up on top, these semicircular towers were specific to Ghibelline defense structure, and so these walls and towers paint a picture of a Ghibelline who was in authority during the time of the expansion. The second expansion came in the 14th century. This was a very major expansion, and it came in two parts. The first expansion to the north and northwest was in 1320 to 1347, and then the second expansion came 1330 to 1340. And with this expansion, this was the first time that we see walls and gates built along the shoreline, and this is specific to Genoa's success in its shipping and maritime trade, and also discovery that happened through the ports. And at this time, Genoa was becoming a major European leader as a trade port, and because of this had to fight for market share with other successful port cities such as Venice. And so there were a series of battles between Genoa and Venice over this time period, and this is why Genoa felt it necessary to expand these walls in two parts during this time period. And in the 16th century, we see a new era of walls, and this was mainly due to a development in firearms and warfare, specifically the use of cannons. Were simply too powerful for the original structure of walls and architecture designs. And so the leader of Genoa at the time, Andrea Doria, who I mentioned before was a part of the Mascherati, ordered the Republic to be placed under the protection of the Spaniards. And so what this gave was a new style of defense architecture called star forts. Star forts, or bastion forts, you can see here a picture, this is an example from the Citadel of Jaca in Spain. And you can see what is key of star forts are their pointed bastions at the top and their straight wall edges, and what this allows is for no blind spots at any point on these bastions, and I'll touch on a sec as to why that's important for Genoa. Genoa, because its walls were so much larger, it doesn't exactly resemble a star, but what you can see here are the bastions that were created in that angular design, that pointed design, and then all of the walls of the pre-existing walls were leveled and made more flat. And so what this was important for Genoa is because they were famously very skilled bowsmen and archers, and so when you were out on these bastions, you can see all the way down to the other bastion, and there are no blind spots, there are no areas that an enemy could be hiding, or any weak spots in your structural design. Another significant part of this expansion of walls is that it included the entire coastline, and so this is a really new formed Genoa around these Spanish walls. This is an example of one of the bastions, and this is maybe the most famous gate in Genoa, in Porto Siberia. And this is a perfect example of what these bastions looked like back then. And it is now a museum, which again speaks to the act of keeping history alive by adding new purposes to these buildings as time changes as well. The last expansion came with the Mura Nuove, or the New Walls, in 1626. This was after repeated attacks on the city led the government to design a more wholesome wall structure. And this was the most major construction effort of all of the expansions, but was particularly impressive for a number of reasons. So this major expansion was constructed in only 4 years, and this was through the use of 800 to 3,000 different bricklayers, stonemasons, and diggers. and they comprise 28 teams. As you can see in the picture, the walls built all the way up into the mountains and back around, and so the terrains that the walls had to be built on were no longer more or less level, and so the difficulty with building this new set of walls was unprecedented. And because of that, the organizers of this wall, there are 2 mathematicians that were hired to make sure that this wall structure was structurally sound throughout the entire length of the wall. This is also obviously much larger than any previous walls, and in total there are 20 kilometers worth of wall line, and 7 kilometers of which come on the coastline. And the entire area within the set of walls is 903 hectares. And so if you think back to the first set of walls that was built in 9th century, and how the area was only 22 hectares, and in a matter of 7 or 800 years, Genoa is able to have a city wall that encompasses 903 hectares. It really speaks to the speed at which Genoa was able to grow, and how dominant they really must have been throughout Europe. The walls today exist in a number of areas throughout the city. They're fairly well maintained. Up in the top left, this is an example of the bastion, and you can see it's slanted and pointed shape here, as this would be very hard to climb up in the day. And then the top right is my favorite picture, because it is of the medieval walls next to a modern technology, and so you have the medieval technological success next to a modern day technological success, and still how much these cars are just dwarfed by the sheer size of this wall. It also is the element of instead of choosing to tear this wall down so that the roads can be larger, Genoa has chosen to adapt its modern society around medieval wall structures, which I think is rather poetic. The bottom pictures are examples of portas that are still a lot around today. And again, you see the modern lifestyle simply working around the older ancient gates. Genoa today is the 6th largest city in Italy, with a population of about over 500,000 people, and is also the capital of the province Liguria, and it is a part of northern Italy's industrial triangle, which goes from Genoa to Milan and up to Turin. Genoa is still wildly successful in industry today, as it's a part of that industrial triangle, but the industries have become much more specialized, focusing mainly on yachts and wine and olive oil. But over time, it has adapted to still be a very successful and economically significant port. And okay, thanks for watching.